Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them and how you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that'll work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable revenue coaching to learn more.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Colin Stewart, and today I'm joined by Michael Gaudette. He's a fractional CMO. He's also led revenue from a Series A company called Benevity. Might have heard of them. One of the, Calgary's second unicorn, where he launched the BDR team. He was the VP of marketing for an airline, which is super interesting. First airline marketing executive we've had on the show. You've also ran marketing for portfolio companies with the Harvest Builders program, including Neo Financial, which is Calgary's third unicorn. Today, we're taking a bit of a left turn away from sales development, but we're not going too far left. We're going to talk about other customer acquisition channels that are sort of related. And this is going to be a great episode for anybody that's interested in what else is out there other than just pure sales development. If you're in sales development, these might be an interesting glimpse to see the metrics into how other channels work. We're going to talk about, the cost to acquire. We're going to talk about some other metrics to measure. We're going to talk about how they work and the teams required to get them up and running. If you're in sales development, I think the interesting thing to listen to is going to be with the lens of how can I integrate my sales development team, program, messaging, campaigns into these channels, or how can I get them to work alongside that? I'll try and call those out as we go. But with that being said, let's jump in. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you. No, thanks, Colin, for having me. Really appreciate being on the pod. I'm a big fan.
Cool. Thanks. And I'm excited to have you on. Michael and I met because I was reaching out to people looking for advice on marketing for predictable revenue. And Michael and I had a really great conversation where he offered some super interesting advice, and we just kind of got into the details. And I thought, you know what, I need to stop asking you questions. We need to hit record. And so we booked this for, a couple of weeks later, and here we are. And so I'm really excited to have Michael on, because I think when you look at creating predictable revenue, when we're looking at sales development teams, what we're trying to do as a sales development team leader, executive, we are trying to find new customers. And I think there are so many other ways that we can integrate into the marketing stack to get more out of marketing with the execution arm of sales development. And so that's what I'm interested. That's where we're going to take the conversation today. I know we got some basics that we want to start with. So before we jump into like the individual channels, why don't we talk about, what are some of the do not pass go, do not collect $200 things that you need to have in place, before we start thinking about marketing or demand gen channels?
Sure. No. And basically, I know we're going to talk about different CAC sizes and that sort of thing. This is the kind of stuff whereby, you can get it, you should get it done before you get into any of those other considerations. And the good news is most of the stuff that we're going to talk about is generally free. Meaning that you don't need to pay for software, you don't need to sort of do anything too crazy. So to get started, basically knowing your buyers, right, and knowing their journey. So essentially, who are you actually selling to? In terms of their demographics, their psychographics, their pain points, their challenges, what are they really seeking? What are they aspiring to in their career? Like that sort of thing, right? So just all of it. Right. And distilling that into, what we call an ideal client profile or persona, if you prefer, in terms of terminology, and just getting everybody aligned and I mean everybody, not from a marketing perspective exclusively. I mean that the whole revenue team is aligned, and even broadening that, the whole organization is aligned as to who these people are that you're looking to sort of sell to and understand. And then the buyer journey, I actually consider that a separate piece. So that's actually the journey that the ICP and their related people organizationally go through in order to sort of identify that there's a pain point, seek out solutions, evaluate solutions, and then make that sort of selection to move forward. And then how do they become advocates at the end of the day? How do they become case studyable if you will. So all of that sort of stuff, I would consider that you need to do that before you spend $1 of money on marketing.
And I love that. It's all in service of finding the happy customer. It's not about the number of badge scans you get or the number of people you add to your newsletter. At the end of the day, it's about the revenue, but then not just the revenue, the happy revenue that's going to turn into more. Because I think that's to your point, like that's the way you turn a customer into 2.5 customers, which lowers your CAC dramatically. And if I say CAC, cost to acquire a customer, we're going to use some acronyms on this podcast. So get your cans of Alphagetti ready.
I'll try to explain some of the acronyms as we go, because I know it could definitely be an alphabet soup out there. The other thing I wanted to mention for sure is actually just from a pipeline management perspective, just making sure that that's sort of aligned. So once you understand that buyer journey and that ICP, then you could actually figure out like, okay, what should a lead look like for us? What should a qualified lead look like for us? So the idea of marketing qualified lead, sales qualified lead, and even what should a deal, let's in HubSpot parlance, what should that look like in order to sort of be a deal that we're forecasting against? What's the criteria that's necessary there? What's required to move on to different stages, like, let's say business casing or contracting or what have you, and actually mapping the buyer journey towards your pipeline stages. That's how you get the best results, because it's a buyer-led journey as opposed to, okay, well, we sent a proposal, so there we go. We're moving on to 30% probability against that. And then in relation as well to the pipeline stages is who is responsible for what within each pipeline stages? What resources potentially get unlocked, right? When are you able to bring the CEO in to demo, for example? Generally speaking, there's deal values that need to be a certain size or strategic value that needs to be articulated about the client that you're trying to get. So really just having that stuff nailed is quite important as well.
I love it. And I'll plus your comment on stage definitions. We had Jamie Buss on the podcast, and I probably bring this episode up like every 10 episodes because it had a real impact on me and on the company. But we implemented her stage definitions, and basically her comment was every stage in your opportunity pipeline stage has to have a customer verifiable outcome.
Yep.
And adding that customer, like an externally validatable customer verifiable outcome and a qualification methodology sitting on top. She was using MEDPIC at the time. That was a total game changer for us internally, for me as a sales leader, for our team, in terms of having a better grip on where our customers really at.
Yep. No, and you talk about, I mean, it's in the name of your company, right? When you talk about predictable, that's what you need, because different salespeople and different marketers, for that matter, right, have different levels of realism, optimism, pessimism, that sort of thing, right? And you want to normalize that within your pipeline in order to have predictable revenue. So, did you get that customer-oriented outcome or client-oriented outcome? I really like the way that's phrased. That's really smart. Just from Zendesk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah,
nice.
We'll throw a link in the show notes because I probably bring it up honestly like every 10 episodes.
Sweet.
But she was forecasting at the time, this is a couple years ago, $500 million in revenue, and she was forecasting the quarters within 1%. And my head exploded.
That's awesome.
When she shared that with me.
that is so awesome. I mean, good for her. That's the only way to achieve it is through doing what she did with just that one sort of example. I'm sure there's a bunch of things to make sure to keep people honest and that sort of idea, but that's fantastic. One of the things I wanted to hit on too is just and you alluded to it when you talked about the badge scans, that what I would term as more, to be generous, I would call them leading indicators of success. If I'm not generous, which often I'm not, I would call them vanity metrics, frankly. So basically just being very much aligned with your revenue team. And one thing too is, like, we talk about marketing, we talk about sales, that sort of thing. And your previous podcast, Tom from SoCo alluded to this, and I completely agree. It's all revenue. We're all on the same team here. And, basically, if there is alignment between sales and marketing, there's actually a study done. If there's alignment with them, then all other things being equal, revenue's 30% higher. So to basically have everybody singing from the same songbook, is super important. So basically just establishing the metrics by which you're going to be evaluating success on of individuals and that sort of thing, right? And so, we're going to talk about how the metrics kind of change between smaller companies and larger organizations. But you need to make the determination as to what is important, what is a metric versus what is a KPI. KPI is essentially, that is the success. I would argue metrics are more about, they're sort of signposts along the way that you are doing a pretty good job. They're what you dig into to understand why the KPI is so strong or so weak this quarter, this month, what have you. And then obviously measuring those in as automated a fashion as possible and making sure that that tracking is set up effectively.
Love it. And so let's talk before we jump into, we're going to talk kind of about the team from an MVP team and then the optimal team later, and then we'll get into the channels. But before we do, let's talk about some of the terminology we're going to be using, some of the metric to talk about some of these metrics.
Sure. So basically, we spoke about CAC already. That's very important, cost per acquisition. Some people also call it CPA. Cost per acquisition. There's also either average order value or average contract value or total contract value. So the size of the deal that's coming in, kind of thing. And then we're going to talk about, conversion rates. And that just means, and a lot of people think that, okay, well, that means, the amount of deals that actually close. Conversion rates are meant to be measured all along the journey from, creating that lead to begin with to the next stage, which is, a qualified lead to the next stage, which is, and this is different for every company, but you need to understand what we call micro conversion rates at each sort of stage. And then, sales cycle, there's not really an acronym there, but the sales cycle length, as well as, how long does it actually take for deals to move through at each different stage and leads to move through at each different stage, right? Because that's going to allow you to sort of target in and say, hey, why does it take us, 4 months in contracting every time when this should be a 3-week sort of thing? And you could actually, drill down on that, identify the problem. Maybe you're not bringing legal in soon enough, for example. Maybe you have some issues with your contract that's always being flagged with legal, that sort of thing. But it allows you to really dig in and tweak those micro conversion rates and that time and stage in order to accelerate your pipeline dramatically.
Love it. So much of what we're going to be talking about is from a cost to acquire perspective. We're going to be talking about a bunch of different channels. I'm curious, how do you make decisions on what channels to invest in? Is it just these numbers and you've got an algorithm, you throw it in a sheet and say, okay, which one gives me the most optimal spend? Or how does that work for you when you're looking at or working with a startup that's trying to onboard some of these channels?
No, that's a great question. So basically what I like to do is it's really a testing framework kind of thing, whereby when you're considering bringing on a certain channel or a certain tactic, you should have a hypothesis as to what it's actually going to do from a revenue perspective. And, I'll admit right from the top almost that I am a terribly biased marketer towards what is generating revenue. That's my orientation. That's what my passion. But basically, just to have people understand and go through the thought exercise of, okay, how do we think this is actually going to move the needle? What are the assumptions that you have in place? What are those assumptions based on, right? And how does that compare to the baseline that we have established in terms of our return on ad spend or ROAS, in terms of ROI, that sort of thing. So really just forcing people before they take an action to actually plan it out and say, what do we actually think is going to happen here? And in that same way that you mentioned with Jamie in terms of, forecasting correctly and that sort of thing, forecasting is a muscle in my mind. And the more you use it, the stronger you get at it. And what you'll find is that maybe in the beginning, you under forecast one test by 50% in terms of revenue that's attributed to it. Another one, you over it by 50%. But if you're doing that methodology consistently, I guarantee that next test, you'll be less than 50% variance from what you're actually predicting. And then the next one, you'll be even better and even better. And it's quite remarkable to sort of see that at work. And a big reason I really like to do this as well is that I actually, like I mentioned, I see revenue as marketing and sales sort of together kind of thing. So what CROs need to do, what smart CMOs need to do, what smart executive VPs of sales need to do, is they need to understand, okay, well, I could spend money on, let's say, an outsourced BDR operation, a great one like predictable revenue, for example, or I could actually spend some money on Google search. What is that going to lead to? What are the differences there that we're sort of expecting? Right. And, just really, really interrogating what you believe those results to be, and testing, and actually, if somebody's putting through a thoughtful test plan, and things don't go exactly the way that they thought, they have reflection on that, they learn from that, and we move forward. And you don't fire the person over it, right? Because the tests are meant to be done in a way whereby you're not going to lose your shirt over this, right? So let's say you have, and I know a good question is, what's a minimum sort of test look like? Imagine that it's a 3-month, this is generically speaking, 3-month time period, about 10K of spend a month kind of thing is kind of a testing budget, sort of at the minimum, I'd sort of say. But getting that apples to apples comparison is quite useful, because you need to know how to deploy your money. It doesn't need to be artificially siloed in terms of marketing and sales.
Totally fair. And I've been in these conversations. We're kind of sitting in this conversation right now. It's end of October 2022, and we're looking at our marketing spend and revenue spend for next year and saying, okay, well, what experiments do we want to run? What do we want to double down on? What's working really, really well? And sort of having these conversations around like, okay, what is that minimum spend? What is the expected output of this? How does that compare to, well, I could just hire 5 SDRs. And so,
Yeah. And
how do we make those decisions? So I'm really excited to have this conversation, because it's timely, because not only am I having it, so it's not the only reason. I'm not only doing this for my personal benefit. That's like 90% of the reason. The other 10% is for the listeners, because I suspect they're going through the same loop.
Yeah. No, and it's not an either or ever. I think with sort of marketing and that sort of thing, because the thing is, when those inbound leads come in, for example, who's going to pick them up and push them forward and that sort of thing. So it might not be, oh, do we have a BDR team or do we invest in marketing? It's like, no, like maybe you have more inbound related BDRs, and you have a few outbound BDRs, for example. And the right mix will depend on who's going to deliver from either that pipeline generation perspective, if you have a longer sales cycle, or and we'll get into this with the sizing, or actually the ROI, if you have a shorter sales cycle and you could actually measure the closings on a monthly basis, that sort of thing.
Totally. Ooh, and I'll introduce another term, just because we haven't added enough of our own terms and whatever into this conversation already.
Go for it.
But the way we think about how marketing and sales development specifically work together, there's the inbound SDR, there's the outbound SDR. So inbound is handling inbound request form submits, or like something that's been scored in the marketing engine that says, oh, you should talk to this person. And then there's the midbound, which would be anything that doesn't kind of hit those trigger points, we almost use them as like prioritized accounts. You've got, it's almost an account-based approach, where you say, hey, this account, there's a trigger or a signal here where X account is, somebody from that account is interested in what we're doing. And so we're going to use that as our own sort of self-generated intent data. And I think this is a huge one that a lot of companies miss. And I think it's one of the reasons why I wanted to have a marketing demand gen professional on a sales development podcast, because I do think there's a ton of free money just sitting there for SDRs to take. Cold outbound is one of the hardest things. And when somebody's already inbounded to you or done something, it's so much easier. And so we'll try and highlight those pieces as we go.
And I'm a big believer, and again, referencing Tom from the last one, it's cold outreach is for the dark ages. There's so many ways to sort of understand and get more information as to who's on your website, who's interacting with your emails in what ways, all that sort of stuff is fodder to sort of understand what is the degree of intent that they have, what is the degree of how hot are they, kind of thing, in terms of wanting to move and that sort of idea. So as much as possible, and I really like that BDR approach. That's interesting. That's always an interesting thing, right? It's like, are we going to let lead nurture do the heavy lifting, meaning automated sequence of marketing emails based on if-then statements kind of thing? Or are we going to let sales sort of do their thing with it? Or are we going to sort of let anarchy sort of at work and have both of them sort of going at it?
Here's where I would totally agree with what you're saying. Here's why we called it midbound. I think we were trying to get too fancy with our marketing, like what is an MQL, what is a hot lead, what are all these definitions?
Yeah.
And instead we just said, okay, well, look at the people that are commenting on this post. Look at the people that thumbs upped it. Look at the people that did this for our content, maybe for other people's content, and just send the SDR after those people.
Yeah.
And it's fairly, it circumvents the whole, well, how do we score it? How do we do this? How do we do that? If you're a small company, you're 2 SDRs and you're having a deep conversation about lead scoring, unless you have an extremely high lead, inbound lead velocity.
Yep.
Like, you're probably better off to just go and do something.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And the thing is, marketing efforts, like if you talk to any marketing leader, what do they need? They need more resources. They need more people, what have you. So if you're, saying that, the BDR team, SDR team are going to step in and sort of help out on that front and not require a nurture or a crazy algorithmic lead score, chances are they're not going to fight you on that and that sort of thing, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Speaking of kind of the tech and the tools, before we jump into team, anything else on CRM or setup that you want to chat about?
Yeah. So basically, I believe, and we're talking to a very software oriented audience and a lot of people selling into software and that sort of thing. CRM is pretty much a requirement in my mind. And there are cheaper CRMs out there. There are more expensive CRMs out there. I'll be transparent. I'm not paid on, I don't get a kickback. HubSpot has a program whereby they give you kickbacks if you refer them in. I don't partake in that, just to sort of have my word be my word and not influenced. But I do advocate for HubSpot quite a bit as sort of a one-stop shop that could do most things pretty well. But yeah, like, I've worked a lot with Salesforce as well. And, at Salesforce, it could do whatever you want it to do, including some things that you shouldn't do. As well, you need to be able to pay for that to be done, right? And Salesforce developers, that sort of thing, hard to sort of come by. And so, HubSpot's just sort of a good happy medium. A lot of the other solutions, I find, they're not that flexible, which totally fine if you're a smaller company, you don't want to spend the money on HubSpot. I totally get it. But just to have a place. And why is CRM important? I guess that's good to answer, right? You want a place whereby, you can look at a screen and you can actually understand all the different interactions from a sales marketing perspective, that whole buyer journey that person has experienced. You want that to be able to be looked at so that the SDRs can empathize with it. The marketing folks can actually, programmatically sort of bring in drips that are effective. Drips are, again, just email sequences. And just to have a better experience that's tailored towards what they actually care about, right? Because if you don't, and as well as the insights of, okay, well, all these deals closed. Who are these people? Who are these companies? What are their dynamics? Blah, 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 blah. So, and that wasn't a pitch for Microsoft Dynamics, but yeah.
As somebody who's used Navision, I don't think there's a good pitch for Microsoft.
Fair.
But that was like a super old Navision. I'm sure it's better now. I did want to add the caveat, and I'm not paid by Salesforce or HubSpot or Microsoft, but I think I would agree that HubSpot does most things well. I don't think HubSpot does outbound very well at all. And I see some of the limitations of HubSpot really getting in the way of our clients being successful with outbound, just in terms of some of the things you can and cannot do without getting into the details. Yeah, we found limitations in addition to they don't work well with any reasonable outbound tool that we've seen. I shouldn't say with any reasonable. The ones that we've tried to plug into it or make it work with it, it feels like HubSpot is intentionally breaking things for them.
No, and the thing is, it would almost be like if you have like an evaluation matrix of, does HubSpot do it good or do they do it very good or excellent? There's a lot of things that they do good. But what are the things that they do excellent? I'd probably say the marketing automation is definitely part of that. I'd say the CRM itself is probably very good, but totally hear you. There's a reason outreach exists. There's a reason why SalesLoft exists, right?
Yeah. I think you could sum up the HubSpot's attitude towards outbound in one story. And it sounds a lot nicer than it was. But Brian, we used to be a sponsor at SaaStr every year, and Aaron and Jason knew each other, and Aaron and Brian knew each other. And every time he would walk by our booth, Brian, the founder of HubSpot, would walk by and like give us the finger, and, like
Wow.
laughing, like not as like not being a jerk about it, but just like we were the outbound people, he was the inbound person. And that's kind of how, like, if you read Mark Roberge's sales acceleration formula, right in the middle, there's a big, like, it's like one of those pop-up books, and the middle finger towards outbound pops up right in the middle. And you're like, oh, I wonder who put this here, Brian.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same in the software. It's like they do it, but they don't want you to do it super well. Because they have their opinions, which they're entitled to, and they're a super successful software company. So who am I to judge?
And I think it goes to a lot of their origin, right? In terms of, they started off as not the enterprise CRM or solution, right? They started off as more of the small business one, right? And basically, so that means volume and that sort of idea. So basically, they were wholly reliant on inbound. Like that's what they kind of do, right? And even and this is changed, but a good portion of their BDRs are inbound focused, right, or midbound focused, if you will, right? So that's just where they've sort of come from. But I'm sure we could talk a lot about the intricacies of the HubSpot versus Salesforce debate. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a business, I think for them, just to build on the HubSpot conversation, for them, it would be almost crazy for them to do outbound because they have such strong inbound. They have probably one of the greatest properties for inbound worldwide. So as an SDR, you could probably find almost any business that you're trying to sell to has probably interacted with HubSpot or HubSpot software in some way.
Yeah.
So if you're an SDR that works at HubSpot, of course you have this asset. But just because HubSpot SDRs are midbound and inbound predominantly doesn't necessarily mean that every customer that uses HubSpot is in the exact same situation.
Totally.
And I think you could argue that many of them are not in anything close to that situation. So therefore, HubSpot should support cold outbound.
And if you have a complete and some other use cases whereby HubSpot might not be a fit, right? If you have an extremely complex buying cycle and that sort of thing, HubSpot, you're going to have to be kludging stuff together to sort of make that happen versus Salesforce, where you can make anything happen that you want. But Salesforce consultants, as well as Salesforce in-house talent, very, very expensive and actually hard to come by, in my experience, at least.
That's fair. I've got a good person if you ever.
Sweet.
Yeah, if you ever need a hand.
Oh, definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. And we know a couple like really big RevOps shops that we've had guests on the podcast. But yeah, if you need
awesome,
need somebody, we get somebody awesome that does stuff part-time.
See, I'm getting something out of this podcast too. This is fantastic.
100%. We kind of I wasn't planning on us going on the big, like, what about HubSpot tangent? Let's jump into team.
Sure.
So when we're talking about marketing channels, what is the kind of minimum viable marketing team from your perspective?
Yeah, no, and that's a good question to ask. And I mean, I think that you at least need one strong person that owns the area, and owns it from a strategy perspective and is able to do some execution. So I think that's sort of the thing. In terms of their background, I would definitely skew towards somebody that is analytically adept, kind of thing. So, I'm also a big fan of, RevOps as a function and that sort of thing, or marketing operations, sales operations, that kind of thing. So, somebody that actually owns that area and is actually the leader in marketing or leading that area, I'm a big fan of that because they have their fingers on the pulse in terms of exactly what's going on from that revenue perspective and that kind of thing. And then that person can be backstopped with agency support or contractor support. And we'll get into this a little bit. There's some things that are easier to contract out than other things. Generally speaking, things that you could measure the impact in a very direct fashion in a short amount of time, such as paid media and stuff like that. That's a good thing to outsource potentially. Stuff that's very much ingrained within your organization and it's hard or opaque to actually evaluate the success of it, like RevOps, for example. That's something that's more an in-house role in my estimation.
Gotcha. I'm curious. Yeah, you know what? That's fair. That's fair. I like the differentiation between sort of the things that make sense to have internally. I always come back to, I think it's a Bezos quote. Whatever doesn't make your beer taste better should be outsourced because it's taking your focus away from, and I think when you look at the marketing side of things, some of the execution on the SEO may or may not. Like with HubSpot, it certainly does. So like HubSpot's definitely never going to outsource their marketing because their marketing is the core product.
Yep.
And I think you could make an argument that the strategy of the marketing department does make the beer taste better, but the execution of certain things.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree. And the thing is, when you're starting out from a marketing perspective, do you need a full-time designer, let's say? I mean, maybe when you're starting out net new, maybe you need a lot of resources there in terms of getting the website up and brand identity and that sort of stuff. But, you got to prioritize, right? Like there's never enough resources. So this is just sort of like, hey, what's the shoestring kind of look like here? The shoestring team. So that's sort of what I'm thinking about.
Totally fair. Now, if we upgrade from shoestring team to Velcro team, so like the optimal, I'm assuming that's the upgrade.
Yeah.
Optimal general sort of marketing team. What does that look like to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a big fan of, a RevOps person again, or call it marketing ops if you have a sales ops counterpart and they could partner and that sort of idea. But, if the RevOps person does have some site optimization chops, so they are able to run, Google Optimize or Optimizely on the website in order to sort of get insights, improve conversion rates, that sort of thing. That's a big plus. Paid person, so paid media person, once you have everything sort of established in the background that you need established, so you don't have a leaky pipeline, a leaky funnel. That's a good person to have in-house when you have all the others sort of in place, because again, this can be outsourced. So somebody with, and again, if we're talking about a B2B orientation, LinkedIn experience is pretty important, search experience is pretty important, retargeting is pretty important. And then, a strong content person. So content cuts many, many, many different ways. And there is actually not enough time in the day, right? Because when you think about content, you're not just thinking about, marketing collateral or website or whatever. You're thinking about sales collateral too, right? Because you don't want to waste the sales team time with them, coming up with their own materials and that sort of thing. You want to partner with them, understand, and you want to share the ICP, understand who that is, share the buyer journey, understand who that is. Everybody's bought in. And then from that, essentially you're identifying, okay, where are we sort of stumbling in terms of this pipeline, and what would be helpful as material in order to sort of dislodge this, right? So is it IT's never bought in at the end of the day, and that's always why we lose, or that's why we often lose deals. Okay. Would an IT one pager be helpful that we can get out to them? Would and this is maybe more sales engineering, but maybe a demo site that's more tailored towards IT's sort of concerns might make sense, or blah, blah, blah. So content person, if that content person does have strong SEO, that's fantastic as well. And they might also rely on maybe some outside resources, maybe a firm to actually produce case studies for them, for example, that kind of idea. And then, once you get to a certain size, actually having that full-time visual graphics person to sort of support and make sure all your material looks fantastic.
Fantastic. So I love the kind of general overview. And we spent 20 minutes talking about sort of metrics, kind of the basics, the team, the optimal team. Let's talk about channels. Now, for those listening, we're going to break this down by cost to acquire. So by CAC, we're going to start with $1,000 to 10,000. Then we're going to go 10K to 50K, and then above 50K as the loose guidelines. there's probably some bleed. There's probably some, some channels could be here and there. We'll try to call that out. These are, we had to come up with a framework for the conversation. These are not hard and fast rules. These are kind of directionally correct. Is that fair?
Totally. Yep. No, that's completely right. And I'm glad you're calling out that caveat before we dig in.
Perfect. And so let's talk about in that smaller deal size, $1,000 to $10,000. Where do we start? What are the metrics? What are the KPIs? And what's the kind of the direction we're going here?
Yeah. So in my mind, the most important things to sort of measure here. So you're talking about smaller deals, that sort of idea. So the assumption is the smaller a deal is, the quicker the time to sale will be. So what does that mean? That means there's less importance actually on pipeline forecasting and that sort of idea, right? Because you're actually going to see that result at the end of the day pretty soon, right? So leading sort of indicators of success or metrics, CAC, and then return on ad spend would be the other one. So the amount of money you're spending, how much are you actually sort of getting back in terms of revenue? And then from a KPI perspective, you want to look at close one revenue from inbound. You want to look at that not only inbound as a whole, but on a per channel basis, as well as, those channels that you're testing or those tactics that you're testing. You want to understand what is the result there, right? And then both the aggregate as well as channel level ROI. And this is where, I find that marketers can sort of get an easy ride with this, whereby they say, hey, look at our ROI and that sort of thing. And they actually don't factor in their salaries, their compensation, that sort of thing to it. Whereas I find that, sales is better at actually figuring out, hey, we give this person X, we spiff this person Y, and they produce Z for us. They're much more methodical at that. Marketing needs to hold themselves to that kind of account as well. So basically determining what does that ROI look like for your entire team and what you actually produce, as well as each of the different channels and tactics.
Totally. And if I can zoom out and just kind of step into the CEO role for a minute.
Yeah.
This matters to kind of optimize and choose which channels are working best. At the end of the day, none of it matters if you're not acquiring customers, because as the CEO, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to look at my revenue, my investment in my revenue team, sales, marketing. And I'm going to take that total investment divided by the total net new bookings and look at, okay, what did each new booking cost us, whether it's on a number basis or on a cost to acquire a dollar revenue basis, that sort of thing. What percentage is going towards? So like these are indicators that we're looking at to like pick which channels. At the end of the day, like your marketing, your sales team, your revenue team together is being measured by the founder, CEO, CFO on the total return, the total cost to acquire a customer, sales and marketing full in.
Yep. And the thing is, and what I often say is that if you're doing your job well as a CMO, as a VP of marketing, or even, take the sales leadership side or revenue leadership side as a whole, if your CFO is coming to you at budget time and asking you how much budget you want, as opposed to we have this budget for you, then you're doing your job. Right? In the sense of they have faith that what you're doing is actually, you're a revenue machine. Spend goes in here, revenue comes out there. I have faith in your ability to predict, to be judicious with your spend, and to only spend if it's actually going to create that incremental return that's meaningful, right? So, if the CFO is, willing to put a dump truck full of money in front of your organization to sort of spend, then that's a good sign that they have faith in what you're doing, and you're doing something right.
Totally. I think the analogy that's most apt here is you want to be a vending machine and not a slot machine. You put a quarter in, you push a couple buttons, chocolate bar pops out the bottom every time.
Yeah.
Versus a slot machine. Who knows what happens?
Something else that's important too, and often marketing organizations get caught in this too, is just they are perceived as a cost center. And if you're in that situation, you need to flip that. You need to flip that situation. You need to become seen as a revenue generating sort of center rather than a cost center, and understanding those steps as to how to get there, and where are the perceptions organizationally? How are you actually how is your department sort of set up, right? Because if you are just, and I see this in a lot of organizations, if marketing is just order takers from sales, order takers from product, order takers from client services, then you are essentially just a service-oriented business that's pretty much just a cost center. So, whereby if you're able to actually say, you give us this, we produce this in terms of revenue, the conversation is completely different.
Totally fair. And I think the kind of differentiation there is, at least in my mind, is the difference between sort of you hire somebody for marketing versus you've hired somebody for demand gen. Marketing is, it's still a cost, but demand gen, if I'm investing in demand gen dollars, every dollar should turn into, $3 to $5, and that's why we keep pushing back to like cost to acquire and all these metrics and numbers. We've digressed a lot. I want to jump into
Sure.
the small 1K to 10K deal sizes, or sorry, cost to acquire a customer. So this is where you are comfortable spending $1,000 to $10,000 to acquire. Wait, no, we've done it as ACVs, right?
Yeah,
We're not talking
that's
about,
right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So let me try that again. We don't have to edit this. I'll just basically for
They're
this
correlated
cost
anyways, but yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
Basically $1,000 to $10,000 offering, probably like an annual contract value. So for companies that have those annual contract values, what are the top 3 channels?
Yeah. So, when you're talking about deal sizes like that, you're going to need a lot of volume, right? If you want to be $1 billion company, that sort of thing. And that's where automation becomes very, very useful here. So actually, I put marketing automation, drip campaigns as actually number 1 here. Because basically a lot of these softwares that sort of would match this profile, you'd, for example, have a trial that's associated with it, 30-day trial, 14-day trial, 7-day trial. You need to convert those people from trial to actually paid usage, and from paid usage to like, let's say, monthly usage or monthly subscription to annual subscription, let's say, that sort of idea, and then move them on to being a referrer of yours with a discount and a sweetener for them kind of on the back end of that. So you need a technology that's able to power all of that, right? So that's why I really put marketing automation pretty high in there. And you want to have a good program in place before you start dumping money into paid. Because again, you don't want to, send people to a leaky funnel, a leaky pipeline. It's just not going to work out very well.
100%. And so if you look at, so marketing automation is the first piece. It's going to have your lowest cost to acquire customer, because it's just you're investing in the whatever tool, and then the setup. So what's the next one?
Yeah. So, and I would say that marketing automation, what it does is it lowers the CAC for everything else you do, right? Your CAC for paid will become lower if you have a good marketing automation in place, right? That's attributable. True. So the next one I put here is SEM. And the thought process here is essentially, LinkedIn's great, but let's say for a lot of those technologies that I mentioned, so imagine a FreshBooks or something like that, right? Like you can't necessarily granularly target on LinkedIn to any great effect, in the sense of, oh, you're targeting presidents of companies 1 to 10. That's the universe, in that is super wide. It's just not going to be as useful there. So actually targeting with search can be more useful. So actually going after the intent, right? For example, using a FreshBooks, let's say you have a disruptive technology that's going to take out FreshBooks, and that'd be sad. That's a Canadian tech company, but oh well. So basically, if you're bidding on accounting software or accounting software SMB, that sort of thing, that's what those people are looking for. So you want to be able to be in front of them and actually put your brand first there. So, nice thing about SEM too, it's so measurable. It's just super nice in that way. What you spent, what you spent on that contractor who's running your program, or that in-house person who's running that program. And so you can actually determine, okay, that 3-month test that we ran, this is what we actually got from it. And so that's why I'm a big fan of that for this sort of snack size, if you will.
And what would you say for the SEM side?
Yep.
What is the kind of minimum test? Like, if somebody's sitting there going, okay, I want to run some ads, can they get away with $30 a month, or do they have to spend 1,000 or 10,000 or whatever?
Yeah, $30 a month, I can't see that happening. The best thing to do is you just need to and this is where that piloting comes through, right? In the sense of like, okay, what is your plan here? And what you have to do, and the information's out there, right, on Google's tools and that sort of thing. So you go and you say, okay, well, this is what the cost per click actually looks like for these keywords. Okay, so let's say cost per click is going to be $10, let's say. And then it's like, okay, well, what do we expect conversion rate to be at when they get to the site? And, you know, you could be aggressive and say, hey, we're expecting a 5% conversion rate, for example. Or you could be conservative and say maybe 1% or something like that. And these are very general numbers, like it's industry specific and blah, 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 blah. But basically, okay, so if you're spending, let's say, if $30 a month in that scenario, you're getting 3 clicks a month. You're not going to learn anything from that. And you're probably getting one conversion every year from that. So you're not going to learn anything from that. Right. So you need to have something whereby it's meaningful. You are getting conversions every month at the very least. Right. So just do that math and reverse engineer what the budget should sort of be from there. As well, you know, if you have no competency in this area, one thing is that Google has great resources that are free, certifications, blah, 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 blah. As well, you know, agencies or contractors that are dealing with companies that you respect and that you've seen grow and that sort of thing, you know, they could sort of give you an idea, but it's somewhat dangerous if you're going in absolutely blind in terms of how this stuff works. But yeah, I mean, you know, in terms of what's a good budget, you just got to do the math, basically.
So you want to see, so if we could sharpen the point on advice for this channel, for this particular channel, it's not necessarily about the spend, because that's going to depend on your sort of cost per click. It's really more about, you want to be able to get a statistically significant number of conversions every month. And so that's going to vary dramatically based on the cost for a keyword. Roughly how many conversions do you think? Like, what you said, at least one a month? Is it better to have, I mean, obviously better to have
more.
100.
Yeah, it's better to have more than that. And I mean, the one thing I would say and this is the power of KPIs, right? What we said was the KPI for this channel is when you think about return on ad spend, and when you think about the ROI of the channel and that sort of thing, and closing happens pretty quickly in this size. So basically, if you're spending X and you're getting, you know, if you're getting an ROI of at least 1 out of it, then, you know, keep spending, potentially spend more on this, right? Like, why not, right? So unless there's another channel that can dislodge it from a results perspective and it's actually not your most efficient now, right? So really just keep ROAS, keep ROI in mind, and especially when you're dealing with outsourced resources, because there are so many things that you know, contractors, agencies will talk about. If the ROAS is not good, if the ROI is not good, right? They'll talk about what the click-through rate is of the ads. They'll talk about the number of impressions you're getting. They'll talk about your CPM, cost per 1,000 impressions. Like, but you have to remain focused on that outcome that you're seeking, right? Focus on the KPI. And I'll sound like a broken record, but that's okay. If people come away from this podcast thinking, hey, my marketing needs to correspond to revenue production more, fantastic, I'm happy.
And I love that. That was a big takeaway from the first conversation that you and I had, was these other numbers don't really matter. It's all about the revenue that they are generating.
Yeah, completely.
So we've talked about marketing automation. We've talked about SEM. What's the next channel available at this sort of 1 to 10K?
So the other one, and this is, and I say the other one, this is sort of a top 3. It's not so much a channel as it is, you know, just like marketing automation. It's sort of to make your traffic actually do better things, right? And so landing page optimization, website optimization is what I'd advocate here. Because again, when you're dealing with those, the lower sort of average order values or average contract values, you're going to want more volume, more likely. And that's really cool because that enables you to test more, right? And the idea of, okay, let's say you have your ICP case study video on your homepage, and right in front of everybody, versus not having that on there and having, let's say, you know, just your value proposition. Which one is going to perform better from a conversion rate perspective? The answer is, I don't know, but it will perform differently, you know, and one is going to be superior to the other, right? So basically, to have that sort of practice in place of, you know, doing A/B tests. And again, Google Optimize, free solution. Optimizely is more advanced, you know, pretty easy to set up, that sort of thing. And just that same kind of hypothesis testing sort of roadmap, that sort of thing, that you would apply with marketing channels, you would apply for website testing. And anybody that has like a Bachelor of Science or something like that, like understands this stuff. Like it's not, this stuff has been around since like before Newton, right? Like it's just, you know, you have a hypothesis, you test it. Did it work? Did it not work? What are your reflections on that? What should happen next because of this, right? And with this kind of stuff, like people might not be excited about like, oh, moving from a 2% conversion rate to a 2.5% conversion rate. But guess what? Your revenue just went up 25%. Like, and with a free software that you used. Yeah.
I see why you started here. These first ones are, or at least number 1 and number 3 are pretty low hanging fruit that are compared to, say, dropping 10K a month in
Totally.
search engine marketing.
Yep, completely.
Perfect. So we spent some time talking about the first 3. You know, I noticed that you didn't put SEO in there. Talking about why not SEO? I assumed coming into this that was going to be your number 1. So why not number 1? And then, you know, what are your thoughts on SEO?
Yeah, no, and it's essentially like, you know, it's number 4, I guess, in the hierarchy. So, you know, there you go. But basically, so with SEO, I'm a big fan of SEO, and you know, both on page, off page, like can have dramatically amazing results, and it's the kind of thing of, you know, you invest now and you're going to get dividends that will last into the future with SEO, right? So, but the thing is, a few things about SEO, it does take a while to actually see the results of it. It's not instantaneous that Google's going to spider your website tomorrow again and say, hey, this is really, really fantastic. And so we're going to make a lot of changes to where you guys rank and that sort of thing. So it's not instantaneous is one thing. The other thing to keep in mind too is that it's not actually, you can't definitively determine causality of it as well, right? The ranking shift. Did the ranking shift because of the algorithm change that happened last month? Or did it shift because that blog post you put out was super duper awesome, right? So you can't as directly attribute the results to it, right? And this has become even more so after a few years ago, something called, well, basically everybody knows it as not provided, which is essentially you actually don't know the organic search queries that bring people to site. It just says not provided. You have some information from Google Search Console, and some other tools can provide you some insights, but it's not the way it used to be, where it is as terribly optimizable. But huge fan of SEO. You also need somebody who's good at it, frankly, because you could spend a lot of money here and it's not very good in practice. And what I mean by that, you're focusing on the wrong keywords. Either they're too competitive, or let's say the volume's too low and you're not doing a long tail strategy very thoughtfully, that sort of idea. But no, like I'm a big fan of SEO. You just need to be able to do it well. Some technologies, if you do want to focus on SEO, that I recommend you get either SEMrush or Moz or a technology like that. So, and Moz has come a long way in terms of just being very prescriptive as to what you should do. So you don't need somebody that's like the expert. You need a sharp, you know, young person to sort of go in there, and I'm sort of saying my age here, to sort of go in there and figure out Moz and own it and get really excited about the insights that is being provided and sort of action the things that it's telling it to do.
Cool. Fun fact. I think the podcast is probably live now. We just had Rand Fishkin on the show.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a huge get. That's awesome.
I saw the name in our podcast list and I was like, Sarah, I'm very sorry, but I'm gonna steal this episode from you. And then it turns out she was really busy, and so yeah, I got a chance to. And for those that don't know, Rand is the founder of Moz, kind of like internet royalty.
The Wizard of Moz.
The Wizard of Moz, 100%. Super cool guy. He's got a new company called SparkToro. That does like the persona research. So super interesting.
And I haven't read his book, but I heard it's super good. Lost and Founder.
Yeah, I've got it sitting behind me here.
Oh, sweet.
I haven't had a chance to dig into it yet. I've got a big stack of books that I've got to read, but it's up next. Yeah.
No, I heard. Basically, he's very forthright about some of the mistakes that were made in terms of like, you know, exiting and blah blah blah. So super interesting. But no, that's awesome. I'll definitely listen to that one. And then, I mean, another few to just mention really quickly, review sites can be really good, depending on the industry that you're in. So G2 Crowd, Capterra, they have both organic, so free ways to sort of list, as well as paid listings to sort of augment your, what you look like there. And yeah, I mean, I did put things like Drift and Intercom and that sort of thing. That sort of ventures into the SDR world for sure. Yeah. So
and if you want to climb
yep.
like right into the SDR world, I put my friend's company up here because I was like adding.
Cool.
Yeah, I saw the notes and I was like, it's a company called With.
Okay.
WHITHE.co.
Yeah.
This was like we had joked, a friend and I had joked about building this company a long time ago. But it's basically like, it's like Drift, but it's connected to the video like instantly.
Okay. Wow.
And so like, if you look on the site, you can just see like Daniel sitting there. You're like, cool, I'm gonna jump in. And then yeah, we
Wow.
joked
I
about just
imagine they
keeping one of
have.
our reps on a Zoom that
Yeah.
people could just like jump in and like see them in a fishbowl. We didn't do this. He did a much better job of the alert system and kind of connected you up right away, but super interesting little.
That probably like the utilization, and this is probably his value prop, right? Probably goes up like, I don't know, 25, 30, 50% or something, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're in this range, listen, for like I don't think it makes sense. There are certain businesses like under $1,000 probably doesn't make a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Above 50K probably doesn't make a ton of sense because you're getting into more complex buying sales cycles. But in this like short, I can make a decision right away. The speed to closing or speed to that first meeting could be almost instantaneous if they're on the website. Be like, oh, I just want to talk with Daniel right now, and I can hit that and like ask them a couple of questions. Like that's pretty cool.
That's great. They're there. It's not a bot. Yeah. No, it's that's super cool. Wow, learning so much. Thank you, Colin.
No problem. I'm curious your thoughts on Drift because we were Intercom for a long time, and then it turned out to be like $10,000 a month to have like the chat tool. And so we got rid of Intercom. We moved to Drift because that was the new hotness, and I really loved David and David's podcast. And we had this huge boost initially from Drift. We got like 30%, 40% lift in the first couple of months, and then it totally died off. I'm curious your perspective. Is this was it a boost because Drift was new and unique and buyers just hadn't seen that and then they adjusted to it and now then they had seen it everywhere kind of 6 months later? Or was it something that we could have been doing wrong? I'm curious what your take is on Drift. Do you see that big boost initially and then it dies off? Or
no, I mean, I consider myself quite well rounded in a number of different areas. I would say this is not something where I would be able to sort of say, hey, like this is how to use Drift effectively, that sort of idea, or what's sort of happened with it. I just know that the BDRs that I've worked with and that sort of thing, they've really appreciated having that source of leads and that sort of thing. It's almost like it's a bit of a dopamine hit, right? And they might be not great leads a lot of the time, and they might actually be distracting potentially and actually not qualified enough, which is not great to waste your time on. But no, I just thought I'd put that in as other things for companies to consider, but can't speak to your experience or why that sort of happened.
That's fair. I think building on sort of we had talked about like where does sales development kind of fit in this conversation. I think in the 1 to 10K, closer to 1K, definitely doesn't work. At 10K, at the 10K mark, you're in the realm of the math could work. I think for a lot of companies, if you have a very short sales cycle, and I mean, so much of this comes down to product market fit and how relevant and how obvious it is. If it's a short sales cycle, if it's an obvious use case that you can send somebody email and they go, oh yeah, we need that. Then I think sales development, like a volume play, can work, not will work. Please don't go out and just start bombing people with email, but it's probably worth a test at the 10K mark. It is in my opinion, one of the lower bounds. I've seen people dip down on this. But I think anytime you go below 10K, the question you need to ask is how much am I willing to invest to acquire a customer?
Mm-hmm.
And in the cases where companies have gone at this rate at a applied sales development for a $5,000 ACV product, they are either they're confident that they're going to have a 10-year customer lifetime, or they're venture backed and they need to hit certain customer acquisition numbers in order to raise the next round.
Mm,
So the cost to acquire a customer is not relevant.
yeah.
This is the decision that you're making. If you're profitable growth, the numbers can work at 10K, but they have to be very good.
Mhm.
They have to be very good, and your sales cycles have to be tight. And maybe you're even having you're running sales development through your AE's accounts at this stage, and the AEs are handling the replies and setting up those meetings or something along those lines. So I have seen it work. There's a lot of caveats to it can work,
The-
because I've seen it not work most of the time.
Yeah. The one thing I would just add to that is just if you have that sort of method from a revenue channel, revenue tactic perspective that we talked about in terms of, what is a hypothesis? What are we going to achieve from that ROI perspective? It's again, it's apples to apples, right? So if you did get an SDR in, what would that look like in terms of the math, that sort of thing? As well, and again, I'm not paid by commission from you or anything like that, but using a resource like predictable revenue to basically be like, hey guys, I want to see if this works. Can we sort of have a conversation, and maybe there's a 3 months or 6 months sort of trial to see, hey, what does sort of make sense? Is this a viable channel? As well, like you have a lot of integrity. So basically, if somebody's coming to you and you're like, this isn't going to work, you don't want to take on that business anyways, right? So, I would treat it just like it's another revenue channel to be considered and weighed against the other things you could put your money towards.
Totally. And it's funny, it's interesting that it has a very similar motion and risk to SEO. There is a lot of work you need to do up front.
Yep.
And there's a lot of risk. And if you have the strategy wrong, the content wrong, if you have your persona, your ICP wrong, you can be doing everything else right. But if you're targeting the wrong people with the right messaging, you're not going to get anything. And it can take 6 months to you get signals in the first 3 months. So yes, you'll see that we're getting replies, we're getting the sort of really top of the funnel metrics kind of greening up or coming online, but you're very unlikely to get a closed deal in the first 3 months.
Yeah, no, and that's interesting that you talk about those parallels, and after you said them, yeah, makes a ton of sense. It's they're quite akin in terms of channels and expectations.
Yeah, one of the hardest things about running a company that does outsourcing for sales development is companies come and they're like, hey, we want to buy, and they're all excited, and they're like, oh, but we want to pilot it, and we want to see like closed won deals in 3 months. And you're like, what's your sales cycle? 4 months.
Do you have a time machine?
I'm like,
so
should we
what's
do
a
some
good
math together?
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. I mean, sort of flipping the format a little bit. What's a good sort of pilot period for you? Is that 6 to 12 month sort of range, looking at what sales cycle kind of looks like, right? So essentially
Yeah.
2x sales cycle maybe, or
That 2x sales cycle is almost exactly what I tell people.
Yeah.
Your first quarter is like, I like to think about it in a year, or sorry, in quarters. At the end of the day, if you're hitting your milestones in 2 years, you are profitable, you have returned the investment, and you're making a multiple of what you've invested. The trick is, if you don't get to 2 years, you lose out on that huge investment. And I think a lot of companies, probably similar to inbound, they bail after 3, 6, 12 months because they say,
Yeah.
oh, we haven't seen enough deals to make it profitable. It's like, well, yes, you're a couple of tweaks away from, you've got it, you get to here and you're seeing replies, but then you're not, and so you've got to make a couple of tweaks to unlock and get past that roadblock, and then you'll get to the next stage, and then you get to the next stage.
So something that's important, I feel like I should mention here is that, when you're sort of coming up with your hypothesis and that sort of thing, the example of SEM that I mentioned, 3-month test, you could sort of determine what's going on, that sort of thing. What I would actually suggest with folks is like, you look at that month 3 ROAS and ROI. You don't look at month 1 and month 2, that's ramp. Right.
Mhm.
So essentially what you want to do is, like, let's say it's a 3-month sales cycle. So it's a 6-month test with an outsourced BDR. Basically what you would do is you would look at what are they producing in month 6? What does the unit economics look like in month 6? And then you sort of extrapolate that out and be like, okay, well, our payback is going to be this, and it's gravy now. So just making sure not to sort of make bad decisions based on ramp months.
100%. And I would also factor in with inbound, your customer, you're finding people that are motivated, right? You're setting up all these fishing traps, and people are swimming around and swimming into them. When you're going with outbound, you're hunting. for people that are not looking for what you're doing. And so that's why your sales cycles are going to be probably twice as long.
Yep.
And your conversion is not going to be the same as it is with inbound. Like if you're comparing apples to apples, you're going to look at outbound and be like, oh, this is a much, much worse channel. The thing you can do to make it much more appealing is you get to select your customers. So select the larger customers to make sure that it's going to be profitable. You asked earlier, like, what is the sort of time scale that I think about? I said quarters. The first quarter is kind of the ramp, getting the tech, the tools, the team online, getting your messaging and your ICPs worked out and tested, and that like initial messaging kind of worked out. So you're going to start to see meetings. You'll probably see like, I don't know, one or two in the first month, 2 to 4 in the second month, and 4 to 6, 4 to 8 in the third month. It totally depends on your cost to acquire, or your ACV, and it's like, how greenfield or how red ocean is this? Do you have something that's totally new that has never been able to be done before? You're going to get much higher rates. If this is something where you are selling copiers, that everybody has a copier, maybe doesn't need a copier, probably not going to buy another one, they don't have an office anymore, it's going to be a very different circumstance. You're going to get a different set of benchmarks. But Q1 is that ramp. Q2 is where you're really is probably the second ramp quarter, where you're seeing like Q1, you want to see replies, you want to see open rates and replies, and then your first meetings. Q2 is where you start to see meetings really start to come online, and then pipeline starting to build. Maybe a first deal come through. Q3, Q4 is where you're going to start to see deals coming through, right? And then beyond Q4 is where you start to see that repeatability hit, and it starts to grow and grow and grow. And the reason is, it comes back to, with outbound, like I said, you're reaching out to people that aren't necessarily motivated, but they are qualified. And when you think about from a timing perspective, when you're reaching out to people that aren't ready, and you have a strong follow-up sequence or cadence for staying in touch with these people that are good fits, but they're not ready yet, this is the magic of sales development. It's that cold, basically, I don't know, the quick math that I would offer is 1 in 20 buyers are in a buying mode in any given state. 5%, 1 in 20. So if you book 10 meetings a month, that means every 2 months, you're going to find one person that's in a buying mode. That means you have 19 people, or 10, 9.5 people every month that you need to add into a long-term follow-up sequence that you're doing high quality outreach follow-up to. That really starts to come online after the first year. And most companies don't do that. Most companies don't make it to the first year. But it's once you get beyond that first year and you're following up with all those previous people, if you're doing a great job, that's going to start doubling the results of your sales development team.
No, that's fantastic, and I think that all makes logical sense to me in terms of how to run it, and it's good. I mean, and the thing is, like you said, people want, hey, let's try you out for a month. I mean, your head probably explodes when you hear that, right?
Oh, we just want to see if we get any results, and you're like, I could take your money, but you're not going to tell you you're not going to get results. So like, may as well go to Vegas because you have a better chance of making money.
Totally.
I've said that, and then we've had a customer that like closed a deal in their first month, and I'm like, sometimes you're lucky, but
totally.
Most don't. Looking at the rest of the things we planned out to talk about, we've only started with the 1 to 10K. Why don't we break this into 2 episodes, because we've got 2 more, and I'd rather not rush them. We've been going for probably almost an hour and a half at this stage. Why don't we break this into 2 episodes? We'll come back and we'll do the 10K to 50K and then 50K plus. Maybe get something booked for next week. How does that sound?
Nope, that sounds good.
Perfect. So listeners, stay tuned. We'll come back to, like we said, the 10K to 50K and the 50K to 100K in episode 2 with Michael Gaudet. In the meantime, if you listen to this and that episode hasn't come out, what's the best way for people, and you want to listen to Michael or get in touch with Michael? Michael, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, probably just my website. So 8020cmo.com. That's not numbers, that is letters. So you need to know how to spell. That's a bit of a sort of a lead barrier I like to put in place. So yeah, 8020cmo.com. And there's useful information as to how I sort of collaborate with companies and bio and all that sort of stuff as well.
Perfect. I like how you have one of those names or one of those words that's like, I probably know how to spell, but I'm going to get it wrong nearly every time I write it out. As the owner of predictablerevenue.com, I love the brand. I hate typing out that because I get the
Yeah.
EUs and RE and mixed up all the time.
I'm just super impressed that you guys own the SERP as #1 for predictable revenue. That is fantastic.
I mean, the book helps so much.
Yeah, for
The
sure.
book, and it's been out there for a long time. So yeah,
Nice.
pretty strong.
Sweet.